All right, so the recording has started, and let me first introduce myself. My name is Mary Montour. I'm a water quality program coordinator with the State of Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And I'm also joined today by my colleague, Noah Gilbert Fuller, who assists our Agricultural Clean Water Initiative program and will be helping take notes today and monitoring the chat. So throughout this informational webinar, you're welcome to put questions in the chat or raise your hand. My goal today is to review our recently released request for grant applications for our Agricultural Clean Water Initiative program. We also call it AgCWIP for short. So we'll be walking through that request for proposals today. And my plan was to review a section at a time and then pause for questions. So we can do that. And then at the end, open it up to more general questions. So please don't be shy. If you have a question that would be beneficial for you or you think would be beneficial for others, please feel free to chime in. All right. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And the first screen I'll be sharing is our Agricultural Clean Water Initiative program webpage, which has all of the materials about our request for proposals and all of the application materials. So you all should be able to see my screen, and it should show the website. And the webpage is agriculture.vermont.gov/agricultural/clean/water/initiative/program. And I will also drop a link in the chat for those to navigate to if you are more comfortable following along on your own computer. So our AgCWIP program, we have opened this program for applications. It opened on November 3rd, and the application deadline is Friday, January 9th. To give a quick overview on the webpage, it gives essentially a summary of our program as a whole, but we're going to be focusing, our discussion is going to be guided primarily from the request for grant application. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this big blue centered AgCWIP fiscal year 2026 request for grant applications. And it should open up in a new tab. Again, you're welcome to follow along on your own computer. But my goal today is to walk through this request for grant applications and clarify any parts of the process that you'd like more information on, or if you have questions about scope of work or eligibility, that's the purpose of the webinar today. All right, so let me make sure this is big enough, but not too big. All right. So a little bit of context, our Agricultural Clean Water Initiative program, it is a state program and it is funded with state money. The money comes from the state's Clean Water Fund, and it is related to the state's Clean Water Act, which has the intent of helping our state meet water quality goals, specifically driven by the total maximum daily load, or the TMDL, for phosphorus in Lake Champlain, but it applies to all of our state water quality goals, and that includes the Long Island Sound, which is the Connecticut River Valley. It includes the Hudson River, it includes the Lake Memphremagog watershed. So this program is for the entire state of Vermont, and its intent is to specifically help the agricultural sector improve water quality in order to meet those state water quality strategies. So that's where the funding from this comes from, is the Clean Water Fund. And this grant program is specific to the agricultural sector. We are anticipating awarding $8 million through this funding opportunity this round. Some of you on this call are familiar with AgCWIP, some might be new, but this is a program we have run since 2018. Our last funding opportunity was in 2024, 2 years ago, and we awarded about $7.5 million in that round. We have not had a funding round since 2024, so this is the current round, and we're about the same, a little bit more than we were in our last funding opportunity in 2024. To review the timeline really quickly, so we posted the request for grant applications earlier this month. We're having this informational webinar. We are collecting questions from interested applicants. That includes questions that might be asked today. We are compiling those. NOAA is helping to compile those into a document that will be available on our website mid-December. And our application deadline is Friday, January 9th by 4:30 p.m. This cover page of the request for grant applications covers that timeline and also your application submission. So we do ask that all applications are submitted by email by the close of business. And I do want to make note that we have committed to providing a confirmation of application receipt. Oops. Hold on, let me just make sure everyone's muted on here. All right. Okay. So that's an important thing to know is please make note of this application deadline. Please make note that we are asking for electronic submissions. And please also make note that you should hear from myself or NOAA that the application has been received within 24 business hours of that submission. Okay. So we covered this a little bit, the introduction and the purpose. AgCWIP, it's our program that supports our partnership with local, regional, state level partners, nonprofit organizations, farmer groups, lots of different types of organizations that are providing services to farmers and helping them implement conservation practices. Therefore, we have 3 priority outcomes for this funding opportunity. And we have an order of priority. So the first priority of this funding, the first priority outcome is that our agricultural producers in Vermont are achieving regulatory compliance. So many of us on this call know that many farms, all farms have to comply with the required agricultural practices, which is our state's water quality rules and regulations. And then many farms that fall into those medium and large farm operation size categories also have rules they need to follow. And there may be other regulations across state or federal programs that farms are subject to. So our first primary outcome of this funding is that farms are achieving regulatory compliance with the RAPs and our state's water quality rules. The secondary priority outcome is agricultural source pollution reduction. Now, this is connected and related to priority number 1, but we also acknowledge that there's farms going above and beyond or taking voluntary action to continue to address conservation issues. So this broadens that scope a bit. But the second priority is really about helping farms reduce soil erosion that goes into waterways, improve waste management. So there's this aspect. And then the final priority outcome is economic and environmental viability on farms. So we know that farms need to be viable to afford or invest in conservation, and that conservation can also be an important part of their business planning and resiliency. So this is also a priority outcome of the AgCWIP program. So these are the 3 big picture outcomes that we hope to see applications relate to. And this is pretty similar to past AgCWIP. It's the same priorities. They've just been split out and worded a little bit differently, but this has consistently been the priorities of our AgCWIP program. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions from anybody about these priority outcomes for the AgCWIP program. All right, we will keep going. So big picture, those are the three outcomes we're aiming for. Eligibility. Our eligible applicants are individual businesses. This includes firms. I will make a note right here. Farms can apply to AgCWIP, but as noted here, the impact of the proposed work needs to benefit multiple farm operations. It needs to benefit a community level engagement. So AgCWIP does not fund individual farm projects. Agricultural service providers are eligible, such as technical assistance providers, engineering, consulting firms, watershed organizations, trade associations, local government entities, and municipalities like conservation districts, municipal boards, conservation commissions. Public or private schools or other educational institutions are eligible, and nonprofit organizations are eligible entities. State and federal government agencies are not eligible to be an applicant, but they can coordinate and collaborate with other applicants to the program. Right. So let's talk about eligible activities. So going back to those priority outcomes, AgCWIP, under this program, any proposed or funded activities must contribute to at least one of those priority outcomes. And we generally categorize AgCWIP activities into 3 activity areas. So we have organizational capacity development. So we recognize that in order for an organization to provide services to farms, there, needs to be an organizational structure and system to do that efficiently and effectively. So we do allow organizational development capacity activities to be eligible. So this could include things like board development or board training, staff training, software, mentorship programs, developing new programs, strategic planning, process improvement projects. Those are examples of organizational capacity activities that, we may consider funding or even have funded in the past. And one thing I do want to note in the RFP, these examples are examples. So you may have an idea that is eligible that's not listed here. But if it's speaking to and contributing to these priority outcomes, our AgCWIP grant team may consider that in an application. The second activity area is education and outreach. So this area is events, it's developing materials, it's hosting webinars, developing educational resources for farms and other audiences. Again, it's a pretty broad activity area. It just needs to contribute to those overall priority outcomes of the program. I will note here that, as a reminder, AgCWIP is primarily for water quality improvements on farms. And remember that first priority outcome is around agricultural compliance. And in the required ag practices, okay, that set of rules that we have related to agriculture and water quality, farmers are required to obtain a certain number of hours of water quality training. And so we have put details in here that events or educational series that help farmers meet those training hours and meet that requirement, we're going to look at that, and that would be considered contributing to priority number 1. So keep that in mind as you're, if you are interested in submitting a proposal that includes education and outreach, we are looking to see, how are those activities supporting water quality improvements on farms. Our next activity area is technical assistance. So I would say this is really a big part of AgCWIP. In past experience in our past grants, technical assistance has been the core activity of many of our applicants. Um, and this is providing direct one-on-one assistance to farmers who are interested in different financial cost share programs and they need help applying or they need help developing their project. They need help with planning. Okay, so this is that connection of farmer to financial cost share programs. And it might also just be recommendations and advising on those conservation practice improvements on farms. Uh, the important thing here to know is if you're submitting an application for technical assistance, making sure to include a description of the services that you're anticipating providing, and the number of farms you're expecting to work with, and also outlining what your anticipated outcomes are of that technical assistance. We do have requirements, which I'll get into a little bit further on in this informational webinar, but if your project were to be funded through this AgCWIP funding opportunity, we do have reporting requirements. And if you're providing technical assistance to farms, all AgCWIP funded grantees and partners have to use our multi-partner agricultural conservation practice tracking and planning geospatial database, which is a mouthful, so we generally call it our partner database. And it's our software system that helps track and coordinate technical assistance through this program and across our state programs as well. So I just want to make note of that some of these activities do have specific reporting requirements. So I talked about this a little bit already, but here's some examples of technical assistance. We have conservation planning, nutrient management planning, resource assessments, grant writing, soil and manure sampling, precision agricultural consultation, conservation equipment assistance, grazing, business planning, and also case management or project coordination. So this is a big category. There's a lot of different services that can be provided to farms that are beneficial and are appreciated by the agricultural community in helping connect farms to the resources they need to implement conservation practices. And then we do have other special water quality project categories. So if you have something that doesn't quite fit in one of these boxes, but does contribute to those outcomes, priority outcomes of AgCWIP, that is something that our grant team could consider in the review process. So I'm going to pause there because this is a pretty hefty part of the request for applications and probably the part taken most into consideration on if this program is a good fit for your organization. So I'm going to pause here and take any questions on eligible activities. All right, we will keep going. All right, so we've talked about our program's priorities. We've talked about our eligible activities. Now we're going to talk a little bit about application requirements. So this is different. So if you are familiar with AgCWIP or have been an AgCWIP grantee in the past, this is where there's been a bit of a change in our request for proposals. So we're splitting our applications into 3 categories this year. We have it outlined in this chart in the request for grant applications. So this program funds projects anywhere from, I would say, $10,000 or $12,000. We've funded before up to multi-million-dollar agreements. So this year we have broken these applications into categories to help us in the review process and also help us categorize grants into likeness. So these are our grant categories this year. So category small are really meant for small projects, individual applications, and very regional or small watershed based. And I do want to make note here, when we say individual, and this will be in our question and answer document, I understand that there are some organizations that need a fiscal sponsor to apply to programs like this, and so when we say individual, we really mean there's one organization solely responsible for the implementation of the project. But if you're an organization that has a $50,000 project, but you need a fiscal sponsor, you can still apply through a fiscal sponsor. It's more about how many organizations are implementing the project. And that will be outlined in our question and answer document once we get that posted. And then as we move up to the medium and large category, that's where collaborating with another organization or having multiple entities performing the work starts to open up opportunity for larger funding requests. The provision there is that your geographic scope is also broadening. So if you're, seeking to work with another organization to provide statewide services, you could be eligible for a medium or large category. So there's not too many different criteria, but it's just a way to categorize applications into likeness. And additionally, when we get to the application requirements, there is one difference between the individual and the joint applications that we'll talk about. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute because I see a couple hands and questions in the chat. So let me answer the question. Okay. I'll answer the question in the chat first. So the question is, if you're building outreach skills through training, does that count? I would say that is eligible under organizational capacity development. So if you're doing any professional development training or professional development skill building, that's organizational capacity, whereas education and outreach is more public outreach focused. All right, Megan, I see your hand is raised.
Thanks. Yeah. So related to the grant application categories, is it possible for an organization to apply for their own individual grant, but also potentially be in someone else's grant as a joint, or like be a part of someone else's much larger proposal?
Yes. So let me bump down to.
Oh, sorry if I skipped ahead.
No, it's okay. So organizations can each only submit one application, but I do know that there is some collaboration that happens amongst the partnership. If you are collaborating on another project, you need to indicate that in your application. So we just need to understand clearly how those partnerships or how those projects are getting broken out per application. I will also note that this is a competitive grant program, so the applications are competing against themselves. So I'll leave it at that. So yes, you can submit individual and you could be part of, say, an outreach project in another application, but my request is that you articulate that and name that in your application. Okay.
Thank you.
And Nancy.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Mary?
Yes.
Awesome. Maybe you'll go into detail, but I know that in reading the RFA, you really want as much specifics as possible as far as events. And we do so much, given that this is 2-year time frame and we do so much collaboration. I'm just wondering, like, how to reflect that in the application so it seems like we're being as specific as you want us to be with the content, but give us some latitude because we do partner so much, either as a collaborative or like we're the lead or we're not the lead, that kind of situation with the different.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do, in our application form, we are asking this year for better event details. So we want to know the topic of the event and generally the audience identified and generally, well, let me just look at it really quick. Target audience, generally the location and your anticipated outcomes. So we understand that event planning doesn't always happen years out. And, a lot of times it's happening maybe a couple months out, and that's okay. We still want to provide some flexibility for organizations to do the education and outreach that they need to meet their intended outcomes. Part of this is we're asking for event information up front because going back to that water quality training credit and hours, we're trying to do pre-approvals in our awards this year instead of sort of back and forth throughout the grant term, so that if your project is funded, we're essentially putting in the award. So if you propose a project that has, say, 6 water quality events, we would want to see, we don't want to just see we're going to host 6 water quality events over 2 years. We want to see we're going to host 1 event on cover cropping, 1 event on soil health improvements. They can still be broad categories, but we want a better sense of the type of information that is hoped to be distributed through these events. If you don't know who the lead event organizer is going to be or who you're collaborating with, that's okay. We just need to know the event title. And if you're putting it in your agreement, if your application were selected for funding and we put that event in your agreement, your organization is responsible for hosting that event and then reporting on it. So we understand that not all the details are going to be fleshed out, but the more you can give, the better sense that our reviewers will have in understanding the scope of your education project. Emily?
My question is about the projects table, so I don't know if you're ready to answer questions on that yet
We will
or
get there.
not.
We'll put a
Great.
pin on that one until we get down to that section.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back up to here and we'll pick up here and we will get to the application template, which I think is probably where a lot of more questions might come about. So we have these different categories. So as you're thinking of your project and if you're going to collaborate or not, think about, which one you fit into best. Performance measures. I want to take a moment to talk about this because our performance measures, AgCWIP grants, are deliverable based. So what that means, if your project is selected for funding and we develop a grant agreement with you, that grant agreement is going to be deliverable based. And what that means is whatever the reporting schedule is, we're not asking for an expenditure report. We're asking for how many events did you host? How many farms did you work with? And those are going to correspond with the agreed upon deliverables in your agreement. So because we're deliverable based, we are putting an emphasis on what your proposed outputs and outcomes will be associated with your proposed scope. So outputs are the effort. Those are the numbers, or what I like to say, the beans of the project. The outcomes are the impact. Okay. So for example, we'll go down to technical assistance. In your proposal, if you propose, I'm going to work with 10 farms over the next 2 years to work on grazing planning. Okay. So your grant agreement, if awarded funding, would say, so-and-so is going to work with 10 farms. That's your output. That's your effort. The impact or the outcome is I'm hoping that 50% of my farms, or 5 of the farms I work with, are going to work with me, and we're going to submit an application to a USDA AgCWIP round. Okay. So that's the outcome. What's the effect of the assistance that you're providing the farms? So we do need to know this. So when you're developing your scope of work and you're thinking about the activities your organization wants to engage in, we need to know what's your effort and what's your impact and how are you going to measure those things. So this table here is the minimum AgCWIP measurements. So what that means is everybody providing technical assistance is going to have this. If you're awarded funding and you're providing technical assistance, we will ask you to report the number of farms you work with and then one of these outcomes. Okay. So in your application, you need to, if you're proposing education and outreach activities, you need to look at this list and determine, what numbers or what measures you're going to include here. So these are the minimums. If you feel like you have other measures that better reflect your project or you think adds to your project statement, you can include those. Okay. So this table is the minimum. This is the minimum tracking measures that we use. And these are the ones that we've used for the last 4 to 6 years. And to give a little bit of context, these measures are what our agricultural program use to report to the Clean Water Fund. So there is reasoning behind some of these measures. Some of them are not as, they might seem small or more logistical, but they are measures that we use to assess the AgCWIP program success and that we also use to report to our funders. So this table is the minimum measures. And you will see in the grant application template, it's going to prompt you to think about what those measures need to be. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions about this deliverable performance-based framework and these minimum required measures and how to integrate that into your scope of work? Are there any questions about that? Yes, Emily.
This is maybe I don't know if it's an easy question to answer or not, but are you guys viewing the outcomes in the same way as you're viewing the outputs in terms of what grant recipients are obligated to perform, knowing that outcomes we have an impact on but aren't directly under our control? I'm just kind of wondering if that's considered part of the agreement in the same way that an output is.
So when it comes to the agreement development, that's a space where that may be discussed. So if we get an application that says like 30 farms, we're going to work with 30 farms and 100% of them are going to implement cover cropping. That's pretty ambitious. And from our experience, we know that that probably is not achievable. So as you're preparing your application, please be thinking and considering what is realistic and what is achievable. And those two questions are really important for this outcome section because you're right. A lot of this outcome impact is very dependent on the farm's engagement and is less in your control than the level of effort. So I would say for the purpose of developing your application, really be considering, look back at, if you're proposing funding for a program that you've had going for a couple of years, you can look back and see, okay, how many farms did we work with, about what percentage, took action, and sort of model your outputs and outcomes in that way. All right, so I'm going to keep moving along because I do want to get to the application form because I think there's going to be more questions there. So for the budget, these are deliverable-based agreements. So this budget that's submitted in the application, that's your project budget. There is some wiggle room. So if your project is awarded funds, there's a little bit of wiggle room in that budget because these are deliverable-based agreements, but overall your budget should be associated with your scope of work and it should be reflective of your proposed efforts and impact. So these are eligible costs: personnel, fringe, and direct. Please note that our AgCWIP program specifically does have a 20% cap on indirect rates. Field supplies, software, printing, rentals, limited catering and light refreshments, mileage, soil manure sampling fees. We do allow farmer stipends. So if you're trying to have a farmer come to a stakeholder meeting or participate in a program, we do allow AgCWIP funds to be used for some farmer stipends. And AgCWIP can also be used to pay for a speaker to come to your workshop, or maybe you want to hire a consultant to help you with web page development for your nutrient management planning course. Okay, so we do allow those costs. These costs are not eligible. So vehicles, equipment, any office buildings or leases, personnel costs that are not directly associated with the project, political advocacy or lobbying, and then any activities or expenses that don't have an agricultural water quality focus, do not benefit Vermont water quality, and so forth. If you have something really specific that you don't see on this list or you don't feel fits into any of these, you're welcome to reach out to me and we can talk through what that is. I will note, because this came up last week, AgCWIP, generally our grants are funding the people and the boots on the ground to programs. AgCWIP is not funding payments for practice services. So we don't, so funding like someone to install exclusion fencing. If you submitted an AgCWIP application and you're going to do rotational grazing technical assistance, but you want to give farms, do a cost share program for fencing, we would not fund that through AgCWIP because that cost share is available through our state, other farmer focused state programs, and also through USDA programs. And there's also some other various practice payment programs across the state of Vermont. So I did want to just make note of that these are not implementation money. It's boots on the ground, technical assistance, education, and outreach money. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving along to our grant application format. So this year there are a couple forms. So we just do our applications by print off download the form, fill it out, and email it per the submission instructions to our agr.waterquality.gov email. We do not have grants software or program that you need to log into for this round. You just need to do the forms and send them in. So all applicants, regardless of your category, need to submit the application form, a budget workbook, and then a good standing form. The good standing form is essentially a self-certification that you're not in court with the state over owing fees or have any water quality violations for your organization. It's a requirement of all state grants. If your project is in that medium or large category and is going to be performed by multiple organizations, or if you will be administering sub-awards, you will need to, each organization that is part of the project needs to submit an entity-specific project detail. So what that means is if there's 3 associations working together, and Association A puts in the application and they're going to contract or sub-award the cover crop workshop series to Organization B, Organization B needs to have a brief summary of that portion of the project that they're responsible for. So this is new. It's very similar to years past. It's just formatted differently. Okay, I see a hand from Megan.
If we are like hiring a speaker to come in, this is not appropriate for that. Like that's different.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Emily.
Yeah, my question was similar. Sometimes, we subaward to the districts, and then sometimes they hire contractors for really specific, like organizational strategic planning or something. So presumably they would not need to, the districts would
No.
have to fill out their section, but the contractor would not. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Any contract for services for the organization, like if you're hiring a facilitator or you're subcontracting for web development or anything like that, that's not what this is meant for. This entity-specific project detail is really for a partner that you're partnering with to conduct the scope of work under your proposal. Okay, so just being mindful of time. So there is 5 main buckets of criteria that each application will be reviewed under. And so it's completeness. So that's, the first thing. We need a complete application. And again, a complete application is the application form, a budget workbook, and a good standing form. And then if you're having multiple organizations joint application, there is project details page for each organization. Capacity and experience is part of the selection criteria. Watershed-based planning is part of the criteria. So going back to the origins of this program and our funding source, the Clean Water Fund, we need these projects to be connected to the state's water quality goals. So part of this is having applicants and interested organizations connect their scope of work to Vermont's tactical basin planning, which is our framework, and watershed strategy development for the state of Vermont. Or, watershed specific planning activities. So this is important. It's 10% of the ranking, but I do implore you all to make sure you're articulating that connection to these water quality goals in your application. Scope of work and impact. So this is really the meat of the application. So this is where you're clearly articulating what you're planning to do, what you would like AgCWIP to fund, and outlining those efforts and impact. So this is a big part of the application. And then budget and cost. So, what's it going to cost you to do this? How did you budget it? And is it reasonable? Have you provided a budget narrative describing, the costs associated with activities? Justifying that request is just as important. Okay. I'm going to skip past the grant agreement payment and reporting, but this essentially sort of outlines again that AgCWIP is deliverable-based agreements. And so typically there's a payment schedule set up with a report, and there's various reporting requirements. They're typically semi-annual. So every 6 months, you're submitting a narrative report, you're updating that partner database I referenced earlier, you're tracking your events. But this all is detailed here in the RFP, and then also discussed if your project were to be awarded funds, there's a period of grant agreement negotiations and development where some of these requirements may be fleshed out. Okay, so I want to skip to the application form, and I want to go through this and make sure I'm answering any questions. So in the RFP, the attachments are all in here as a copy, but you're really going to want to go to our website and download all of these. If you have any trouble downloading these, please reach out to me. I'm happy to email them to you. My biggest tip is when you download it and you open it, save as. Save your own copy somewhere where it's going to be, and that also enables the editing. Okay, so you're going to go through this first page is the cover page, your organization name, your contact, what's your total funding request, what category are you applying for, and does your application have multiple organizations? And this is just sort of a check and a reminder like, okay, make sure you include these attachment E's. Matching funds is optional. We do not require this for AgCWIP. It's not part of the ranking criteria. It's just, this is more of an awareness for us to understand if this is being paired with another funding source. And if your project were awarded funds, we do have match reporting requirements. And then your application summary. This is your one paragraph pitch to our review team. So there's instructions all through here for joint applications. So any application that is multi-organizational, you're going to complete attachment A, the proposal form, as a cumulative representative application of the whole project. It's the whole project pitch. Everybody needs to just provide a brief description of your organization, your award management strategies, and your project team. This is where you're going to connect in that watershed planning. Scope of work is where you're going to detail your project that you're proposing. And table 1 is where you're going to summarize the projects you're proposing and the outputs and outcomes associated with those projects. It also asks you to identify which priority outcome that project is contributing to. So I'm going to pause here because I think, Emily, you had a question on this projects table.
Yeah, I think how we've structured this in the past, at least in our application, was to do this sort of by activity area, and then it might include several projects. So like, for example, technical assistance, we kind of had the summary across all technical assistance, and then say that includes soil and manure sampling, NMP assistance, etc. Is it necessary to break out the outputs and outcomes by each project area? I think it's helpful for planning purposes, but I'm also not sure how, typically we flexed a little bit between those categories, and I'm not sure how strongly people will feel like they can commit to some of the specific project, like the numbers tied to each specific project, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think for others on the call in the past, we've been more activity area driven and less project driven. So this table hasn't necessarily asked for a project. It's just said, okay, you're going to do organizational capacity development. What are you going to do? How much are you going to achieve? We added this project column in this year because we do, for planning purposes, we really want applicants to be work planning in the application phase of this project. These grants are 2-year terms, and we want that thoughtfulness of project planning happening in the application stage rather than the grant award development stage. So we have asked for, thinking through, okay, we're going to do technical assistance. We're going to work with 10 firms. But we want to know in the application, well, what are you going to do with those 10 firms? So we are asking for that second level of detail in the application stage. And that's why we've added this project column. So I think, Emily, to answer your question, we do still want to see this project or this task. But if it's, if you see ways that can be aggregated across the districts, where use your discretion. I think the important part is that you're articulating what the effort is and what the anticipated outcomes are. So again, it's just that second level of detail of, okay, you're going to work with 10 firms. What do you want to do with those 10 firms? So I think that's really what we're trying to get at here.
Thanks, that's helpful.
So everyone has their own style of developing agreements, but it might be you write it all out first and then do the table, or maybe you do the table and then you write it all out. It really depends on your preference, but this projects table is really summarizing, what this project table will also be what's in your grant agreement if awarded funded. So that's why we want people to be thoughtful. Hillary.
Yeah, for those different activity areas, would you ever have a case where the information in your project column was different enough, I guess, that you might have like you might have education and outreach twice to do two different things, or would you just keep one row for education and outreach and put some bullets or something in the project side?
You could have a row for each. You could have 4 rows of education and outreach.
Okay. Thanks.
And these are just some examples that our team came up with. They're just examples, but we do, of course, leave discretion to the applicants as well on how best to communicate and articulate what you want to do. The main takeaway is that you're describing the activities you are seeking funding for and what the outcomes of those activities will be and how they relate or align to our program priorities. Okay, and then also in the application, so this is again the events that we were just talking about. This year we are asking for those events to be listed out. So in years past, we've sort of accepted, okay, they're going to do 8 events over the next 2 years. We do want that second level of detail in the application round. And same with the educational materials. If you're doing a producer guide or, developing some phone app for producers, we want to understand what those are in this application phase. Great. And then for the budget and budget narrative, so there's an Excel spreadsheet, and I am actually going to open this because I want it does look different for those who have done AgCWIP before. It is a different workbook. We're sort of moving away from this activity area driven scope of work and more towards sort of decentralizing those activities and more towards tasks and projects. And so in the budget workbook, we've simplified, we think we've simplified. Hopefully you feel that way too. Let me just make sure. Can someone give me a thumbs up or just make sure that okay. So we're just looking for a budget by, if you've applied to any other grants, this is the typical salaries, fringe, materials, travel, other sub-contracts, sub-awards, and whatnot. So there's this total budget form. So if you're just applying as yourself as an individual, you're just going to fill out this form the best you can. We've put a couple just guiding notes here to help answer some questions we typically get. If you're one of those medium or large applications and you have multiple organizations, each entity or sub-award that you're anticipating, so if you're anticipating doing sub-awards, you're going to have each sub-award do their own budget here. Theoretically, it should all connect in here, but if you need help with any formulas, please reach out to me. But we are not asking for budgets broken out by education outreach, technical assistance. We're not asking for that this year. We're just asking for an overall budget. Are there questions about the budget? Okay. And then finally, if you are doing a joint application and there'll be multiple organizations, we are asking that each entity complete a project detail, which it looks like another application. It is kind of another application, but it essentially outlines that entity's portion of the work being proposed. So if you are a large organization or medium and you're going to have multiple people, multiple sub-awards, multiple teams, I'm happy to meet and talk through this attachment E entity-specific project details with you. It is a little bit of a different framework than years past. But I think it's mainly formatting difference. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and open it up for questions. Megan.
Okay, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, because I haven't gotten too far into this, but this whole subaward thing and the way the last 2 years have gone, with our events and stuff like that. Boy, I don't even know how to say that. Like, I don't charge the full 20% indirect, like I don't do that. But if, say, like if I were to work with somebody like UVM, if they were the big grant writer kind of thing, they're going to take the 20% out of all of the stuff. So in some ways, it's actually more efficient for me to do my own and partner with them. Maybe I need to talk through this with you at another time. Like, because certainly I use UVM's expertise a lot in our events that we do and those kinds of things. But we don't have official partnerships, and I'm just trying to figure out now in this new way that we want to have like clarification of who's leading what and doing what. I'm thinking about that indirect cost and how to be efficient on that. And so I'm not really sure it's totally a question. I'm just like putting it out there and trying to, I think it's part of the process. But any words of wisdom?
Sure. So the 20% technically can be, that is our cap, but there's different ways that different organizations budget for their indirect. They might be doing it broadly. They might be using a billable rate. It's really the discretion of the applicant to work on that, but I'm happy to help answer questions around budgeting specifically, and especially for those of you who collaborate with other organizations very closely, and are trying to figure out how to articulate that or budget for that in your individual applications. I'm happy to meet more one-on-one and discuss that. I will note that I am facilitating this process, but I will not actually be a reviewer, so I am happy to meet with folks individually. Again, any questions that are asked are put in that question and answer document that is available for everybody, but I'm happy to be supportive of applicants as you're thinking through these questions. Is there any other questions? It's a lot of information to work through, so we're at the beginning of the application period. Let's see here. I think there might be something. Okay. All right. I will my contact information is, I'll drop it in the chat. It's also online. And I would encourage you to check back on the website for the Q&A document that will be posted in the coming weeks. And there will also be a posting of this recorded webinar on the website as well. I think my final tip is a lot of organizations across Vermont, especially those that are providing any type of technical assistance to farms, are typically engaged in AgCWIP. So please don't be afraid to talk to each other, coordinate, talk through different project ideas, and think through what you think would be, how you'd like the state AgCWIP program to support the work that you're all doing. All right. Well, thanks everybody. And I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Mary.
All right. Bye.